Hello, welcome to this week's lighting diagram. My name is Trenton Hoshiko, and today we're talking about a portrait of Daniel Hubbard by John Singleton Copley. Fun fact, I used to live nearby to the Copley Square area of Boston, which is named after John Singleton Copley. That's just a fun fact that I learned in my research for this painting. One thing that really strikes me about this is that it has a lot more of a kind of hard light look than a lot of the portraits we look um, at least in terms of allowing more shadows on a kind of nice, fancy portrait than a lot of other ones that opt for much more of a, kind of diffused look. It's not quite a like Rembrandt level of shadow, but it still has more of it than a lot that I see, especially of ones that are meant to look more elegant. And one thing that really kind of cues me in on that is the fabric, which also in my research, I learned that John Singleton Copley loved to do fabrics in an elegant style. And that was a kind of stylistic note that he really focused on. And that is very apparent and evident right here. Daniel Hubbard's wife also had a portrait done by Copley, and hers also has a similar type of fabric nature to it. He did apparently 350-ish of these portraits of Bostonians in the 1764-ish time frame. And if you just look at the different types of fabrics, you have the black fabric here that is absorbing some more of the light. Then you have the white, almost like satin. It's reflecting that light and kind of catching it, and there's all the wrinkles in it. It's really gorgeous. But then you even have this kind of like velvet backing to the chair, and then the whole like kind of drapery behind him as well. There is a diversity of textures that are being brought out by the different types of fabric and the focus that he's putting on them as the artist. But I'm personally really interested in how all these shadows work, especially on the side of the face. So before we get much further, if you want to pick up these filmmaker tools that I have here at the top, that is a template for Draw.io, which is a free and open source diagramming software. You can head over to my Patreon. I have it linked down in the video's description. Template is completely free. You don't have to even join the Patreon. Although if you want to join as a free member, you get notifications for when my videos get posted. If you want to join as a paid member, you can help support these types of videos as well as the videos that I make about cinematography in general. I've had a kind of an increase in the number of people that are over there recently, which I am super, super happy about. And I'm trying to aim now for about 50 members between the paid and free tiers. I just like to know that my videos are being not only watched by people, but also useful enough that people want to, continue watching and be notified when they're posted. Then lastly, if you want to start using Draw.io for your own diagrams and use my template, what you can do to get started is find a video that I have linked in the description down below. That is kind of the getting started guide to using these, getting an image imported, getting the template imported, all those kinds of fun things. Okay, so where were we? Talking about shadows? Yeah, that seems about right for me. So let's take a look first at the face, because that's, kind of the most important part of most portraiture. We have kind of a full exposure on his right side, our camera left, and then we have shadows on the right side. Now, I think these shadows are being manipulated to be a little bit brighter so that we can actually see the face on the far side, because if you look down just even slightly lower underneath the arm, these shadows are actually generally pretty dark. So we do have a little bit of manipulation, and we can use something like a bounce to get some more back in there. But what I also want to notice is that there are all of these wrinkles on the satin type fabric, and those are all kind of creating their own shape and shadow. And oftentimes I like using hard light to capture more detail. I have a lighting diagram from a while ago talking about still lives and using hard light to capture those edges in particular. And I think the same thing is pretty much happening right here in this painting. We also can see kind of the direction of the light because of the velveteen aspect of the back of the chair as well. And so all these things are telling us that we need to be on the camera left of our subject, going across. Probably the angle of the face right here is pretty much flat to the angle of the light, which is then, kind of making it this like sort of split. Maybe it's brought a little bit towards the front, just a little bit to cast a little bit more across, because we do see it kind of crossing the meridian of the nose onto the other side, but it's it's still so slight. And if we're using this for a moving image, then the movement of a person, could obviously change that. I do want to say that I do also want to notice that back here, there is fall off of that light where this area of the fabric is a lot brighter than this area of the fabric. So we know that it's kind of capturing him in a spotlight look, where it falls off kind of behind the chair's back. That is also supported by the idea that the hand is entirely illuminated with not much shadow either. It's probably pretty flat to it, the shadow being more hidden by the angle of the hand in particular. And something that I do just love about paintings in general, I know this is a tangent, but the background here, while it has details to it, it's much more loose than we can even kind of conceive of in a photographic medium, besides like pushing things out of focus with depth of field. This is like a rope or a bell on a rope, something of the sort. And it still is pretty abstract. We kind of just get these diagonal lines. Even though this is pretty realistic of a painting, the background doesn't have all that much detail besides some form to it, and that's it, because that pushes our eye back to our subject here, which in terms of photographic mediums is a good way to think about using depth of field. We can use depth of field to actually push the eye back to the subject. It's not just for fancy bokeh in the background, although that's nice and fun in its own right. So let's start diagramming by building a little set using the floor plan tools. So, I mean, that's pretty much it. I am going to put the desk in here so that we can understand kind of the spatial, aspects of this just a little bit. But this seems to be kind of a desk that's pushed up against a wall. The angles are a little loose here where this is kind of at a slight angle. So we're actually probably looking at him at a slight angle, probably not entirely straight onto his body. So when we talk about placing our camera, we're just going to be, I'm going to put it at least at about 100 degrees. We're almost on flat to the wall, but not quite. And I think that that adds something to the image in terms of not just flattening that space. Being ever so slightly off angle to flat surfaces really can make a difference in your images. If you're getting started out, don't just shoot flat against walls. Use some angles to kind of get a little bit more of a depth in your scene. Have actors move in those angles so that it's not just everybody plastered against a wall, incredibly flat, like it's an awkward theatrical play. So with our camera placed there, I think that we can start discussing lighting. Now we do have a backdrop here of this kind of curtain. I'm not going to try to replicate that in the back, but that would be behind him. So now when we talk about actually choosing a lamp, I would say that you want something that's hard. So that would be a Fresnel, most likely. That's usually my go-to for hard lighting. Now that being said, you could use something that's, like a Bowen's mount light that has a hood and get a similar effect, although you will get double shadows along these areas. And something important to note here is that the shadow is not incredibly hard. We aren't seeing this as a stark black line, and that might be in part because this is a painting. You can be a little bit softer with the, capturing of things, but at the same time, we get a lot of dark edges like right here. So like these folds in the fabric are really dark, pretty hard edges. These shadows of his body, they're a lot softer. That is most likely purposeful because it's usually more flattering to portray people and the actual like subject with a little bit more of a soft light and portray the rest of the scene with a little bit harder light. A lot of Hollywood movies do this, and especially in the classic era, very specifically having shots of women have lens diffusion when you move in for a close-up. Men didn't get that treatment as often, but even still, oftentimes lighting is softened as you move in, even if it's harder when you're in a wide or a master shot. And that partly is just the kind of the physics of the light too, but it helps us develop a style, helps us develop what we like to see, and then we can understand these rules so that we can break them or use them to our advantage. In this case, I'm going to build this out right now with a Fresnel, but we could do something very similar with a hood. And if you don't want the double shadow effect, you could use something like a diffusion sock, and that would then soften it just a little bit so you do have a little bit softer of an edge while retaining most of that hard light look because it is still that kind of singular, relatively small source. So I'm going to put the light back here like this, and then obviously we can't work in 3 dimensions with a 2D diagram, but my idea for this would be that it, actually is 45 degrees or so down because of the angles of these shadows. You can see the shadow right here, and so we're catching that this kind of flap of the overcoat, getting that shadow. And so I think it's going to be about 45-ish degrees down. It could be a little bit lower, it could be a little bit higher. It depends. If you were doing this on your own set, you would have to play with that just a little bit. We're going to get this in here like this. And so we can see how this passes by our subject and would land on the wall right about here, right past the edge of his head. So we get the lighter side on this side and the darker side on this side. Now, like I said, we might actually angle this just a little bit less to make it so that it reaches around his nose and his brow just a tiny bit, something along these lines. Obviously, like I said, in real life, if this is a moving picture, you're going to have, it all play a little bit looser because of the idea that the, human actor moves. But these are kind of the ways we set this up. So now the way this is, we still have the light coming in and landing on the wall behind him and kind of creating that look, while at the same time, we are having it fall off onto the left so that we get that dark area. This kind of lighter patch here, that could even just be a little bit of a reflection. It's so much dimmer than the other areas of the painting. And you'll notice that the light doesn't fall off on the right side of the frame. And so we're not going to have that be ending before the edge of the table in our frame. He is looking towards frame right, which would be obviously the right side of our set also, but his eyes are making contact with the camera. His head is just a little bit turned, his body pretty open to us besides the crossed leg. The lower part of his body is at a profile, his torso is turning, and then his head is facing us with his eyes, but not completely facing us with his face. And so that's why we wanted this light to just go around just slightly so that we can get it on that far side of the face. Now, like I said, this is probably a little bit brighter of an exposure on that far side than you would get when we look at these other shadows. So what we want to do is either this is a white wall, maybe some of that light's going to be bouncing off of it, but really what I think I'm going to do is use a bounce card. This could be as simple as a pizza box. It could be a 5-in-1 reflector that just is using the white. It could be, lots of different things. And we're going to take this and we're going to bounce some light just back on that side of the face. And we're going to just tuck this over back here, kind of off frame, so that it just brings just a little bit of that exposure back to our subject. And with this kind of hard lighting, we're going to get these types of shadows to be really nice and distinct. And we're going to be able to have that kind of great shimmer of the fabric right here being caught. If this was a lot softer of lighting, all these shadows would be much less contrasted. And when they're less contrasted, the shimmer aspect of it's not going to be as wonderful. If you think about like a lake and a really cloudy sky above a lake, you're not going to get that same kind of shimmer off of it. Where if you have a, cloudless day and the sun's in the right angle, you will get those shimmery reflections. I mean, almost blinding reflections off of the water as it laps back and forth. That's the kind of idea that we're shooting for here to really show the elegance of this fabric, if we're recreating this style in particular. And once again, this kind of corner right here kind of shows us not only the position of the light, which is up, because it's kind of going around the top right here, as well as how far it extends down, but also to the camera left and the left of the subject. The chair is in such a position also that maybe not as much of the light is ending up on the satin right here. You can play with angling your chair in those kinds of ways so that it only catches on the edge here. But this edge is really wonderful. It kind of actually sticks out almost a little bit because of its contrast versus the darker areas right behind, the darker area of the chair, and the darker area towards the bottom of the frame. You do want a pretty big cast with your light here because we're not having fall off at the bottom of the frame, nor really at the top of the frame except for the darker side. So we are going to want a spotlight look that is relatively large to capture this. And like I said, you can use a hood and just, instead of having the Fresnel, you could capture something that's reasonably similar to this just with a hood. And I would probably throw a diffusion sock on there to reduce the double shadow effect. Now, at the same time, if you're shooting something that's not set in, 1764, and you have kind of paned windows that cause that double shadow effect, because lots of windows do, especially if they're double pane for insulation, that might actually look fine and normal for your type of scenario. But these are the kinds of things that we talk about and the kinds of things that we have to think about when planning our lighting diagrams. One other little tiny trick when doing these that I love is just looking at the reflections of something that's particularly shiny. So the wood right here at the bottom, it does show us that the light is a single source that's off to the left side, probably up above because this is a little bit of a bulbous area of the chair. If you're watching a movie and you want to kind of think about how a lighting design might have worked, you can usually pause it and see reflections of lights in, car windows, glasses on tables, people's glasses sometimes, watches, pretty much anything that's a reflective type surface. Even your eyes, the actor's eyes will have all those different kinds of catch lights, and you can kind of reverse engineer how a lighting setup might have worked for a type of scene. That's something that I love to do, and definitely one of the ways that I kind of look at these types of paintings. Now, speaking of catch lights, just really quick, we actually don't have a real catch light in his eyes. They're so nicely illuminated that you kind of actually don't have it so much, which is an interesting aspect also because you would technically have a little bit of a catch light, which could just sort of be a little bit of a stylistic note here. You have a little bit more of a catch light type look on the far eye. It's a little less dark on that iris color. Does seem to be a choice that was made by Mr. Copley. I think it's pretty interesting. And then, I've talked about this a million times before, but seeing the shadow from the nose right across here is another way that you can identify maybe how high the light is up. Like I said, it's probably like 35, 40, 45 degrees coming down at that type of angle. So this is a relatively simple one, but a lot to talk about, especially in terms of how we think about using hard light. I love hard lighting looks. I love soft lighting looks too. I talk about windows and all that kind of stuff all the time, but I really like hard lighting. There's something that's much more expressive about it to me in most scenes. I think a lot of movies now go for a more diffused, soft lighting, quote unquote, natural look, but that's not inherently more natural, and naturalism isn't inherently better. Kind of what fits your scene. Like I said, this painting seems to differ from a lot of kind of contemporary portraiture where maybe the scenes were a little bit more diffused, a little bit softer of a light being used, a little bit more flattering, a little bit less shadow. But for this case, because he loves the fabrics, he wanted to be able to see them and see their shape and their form and the flow of them. And to do that better, he used a hard lighting look. So this is a really great example of choosing your stylistic elements that you want to preserve and you want to actually bring to your scene, and then choosing the right tools to do that job. And this is a pretty simple setup, really. It's like basically one light and a bounce card. You don't need all that much to do something like this, but it's about the intention that we put into our scenes, and that's where a lot of the artistry comes from. So that wraps us up for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this kind of video, please give me a like down below. It really helps me with the YouTube algorithm and reaching other people who like these kinds of lighting diagrams and cinematography tutorial type videos. If you want to subscribe for lots more videos about lighting, cinematography, and micro-budget filmmaking in general, I would really appreciate having you. Like I said at the beginning, I do have a Patreon, and that Patreon has tiers that start at just $2 if you want to support these kinds of videos, but it also has a free tier as well, just so you can get notified when I post new things, because they don't always end up in the subscriber box. And on that Patreon is where you can get the free Filmmakers Tools template. That's all linked down in the video's description. If you want to get the kinds of equipment that I've talked about in this video for lighting these kinds of scenes, I have affiliate links down in the video's description. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Remember this week to take care of yourselves, take care of those around you, wear a mask in public to help prevent transmittable illness from spreading further, and watch some movies, view some art, do something that just inspires you creatively. Go on a nature walk or something to just really get those creative juices flowing in some free time that you have. And as always, I hope that you have a wonderful day ahead of you.